smelled of burning and old plastic dust. In the evening, when the house had quieted down, he noticed a faint smell of burning coming from the entrance, as if someone had turned on a lamp in the storage room and forgotten to turn it off. The red indicator light was on by the elevator, but the elevator itself was not working. Ivan Petrovich thought there must be a short circuit somewhere. He returned to his apartment, walked down the narrow corridor where the wallpaper was peeling off the walls, and opened the door to the balcony with a hollow thud. There stood an old television set, a Soviet model, recently found in the attic when his upstairs neighbor asked for help carrying out some junk. He didn't throw it away then. It seemed a pity. The equipment was still sturdy. Since then, the TV had stood by the window, like a silent object from the past. Today, Ivan Petrovich decided to check it out, just to occupy his evening. He had worked as an electrician all his life and still believed that everything should be useful. His pension was small, his new TV had broken down long ago, and there was no point in buying another one. He carefully removed the back cover, cleaned the dust with a brush, and checked the contacts. His fingers still remembered the familiar movements, and the smell of tin and insulation seemed to take him back decades, when he could tell by the sound where the sparks were coming from. When he turned on the TV, the screen flashed with a soft green light, then gray snow. A moment later, an image appeared. An old-fashioned studio, similar to those shown in the early 2000s. The announcer sat at a table, and everything would have looked ordinary if it weren't for the date in the corner of the screen. Tomorrow's date. Ivan Petrovich thought it was just an artifact. Maybe someone had recorded an old tape with a TV program. He wanted to turn it off, but the announcer said the headline, "Fire in a House on Central Street." And then he named the house number. His house. At first, he didn't believe it, but when he heard that the fire broke out in the elevator shaft, no one was injured, something inside him tightened. He automatically looked out the window. Everything was calm across the street. Only the lamp in the entrance was flashing. He thought it was a coincidence. Maybe the TV was connected to an old VCR, and the date was just a glitch. He unplugged it, put the kettle on, but his gaze kept returning to the screen. The next day, the elevator really wasn't working. Two electricians were standing downstairs, one holding a smoky flashlight, the other complaining that the wiring was old and had caught fire. Ivan Petrovich walked past without saying a word. He couldn't get his head around the fact that the TV had shown it in advance. In the evening, he turned it on again. The screen hummed, and again, the announcer, the same voice, the same background. The date of the day after tomorrow appeared on the screen. And the news, a pensioner from the 4th floor was injured when he fell down the stairs. Ivan Petrovich froze. He lived on the 4th floor. He lit a cigarette, even though he had quit long ago. Smoke spread through the room and the TV seemed to reflect it in waves. He told himself it was nonsense, just a coincidence. Maybe the TV was picking up some kind of archived signal. But deep down, where the habit of logic no longer helped, a feeling of anxiety was growing. The kind you get when something in the house is wrong. when everything seems to be as usual, but the small details no longer add up. He decided to check. He went down to the attic, where he had found the TV a week ago. The roof smelled of mold and mice. In the far corner was a box of magazines, faded pages, old receipts, several photo albums. In one black and white photo, he recognized himself 20 years ago, next to a woman he had never seen before, but whose face seemed vaguely familiar. On the back was the caption, "Ivan and Vera, renovation of the City News Studio, 1999. He remembered, indeed at that time their team was installing lighting for television. Vera was a sound engineer. After that renovation, she disappeared somewhere. They said she had moved away. The TV from the attic could have come from there, discarded from the same studio. He returned home. The TV was standing there, the screen dark, but it seemed to reflect movement, as if someone were passing behind him. He turned around. Nothing. He couldn't sleep that night. There was a quiet crackling sound coming from the kitchen, as if an old radio was tuning into a frequency. Ivan Petrovich approached, and the screen was glowing on its own without sound. Then the image stabilized. A newsreader was reading the news. This time it was, "Pensioner Vera S., who lived in house number 14, is missing." He didn't immediately understand what was bothering him. The number matched their house, only a different entrance. He put on his jacket and went downstairs. In the first entrance, there was a young woman with a dog. She said that no one had answered the door of the neighbor in apartment 14 for a long time. The police had already been there, but they hadn't opened the door. They were waiting for relatives. Ivan Petrovich felt a chill inside. The name, the house, the elevator, everything matched the reports. He returned to his apartment and turned off the lights, but the TV screen still reflected a pale glow, as if someone were holding a candle behind the glass. He moved closer and saw his reflection next to the announcer. For a moment, it seemed as if the announcer was looking directly at him, as if waiting for the viewer to understand the meaning. From that evening on, the TV started turning itself on. Sometimes it showed empty programs. No sound, no movement, just a studio with a motionless announcer. Sometimes short messages appeared. A date, a street, a surname. Ivan Petrovich began to write them down in a notebook. In 2 weeks, all but one matched. The last one. In it, the announcer said that an old TV, the source of unknown signals, would be found in House 14. Ivan Petrovich then thought that perhaps his device was part of some experiment, the remains of transmitting equipment. He went to his neighbor on the 5th floor, who had newer equipment. The neighbor looked at it and said that the antenna was not connected at all, and the power came directly from the mains, with no visible signal source. He advised Ivan Petrovich to throw it away, or at least take it out of the apartment. But Ivan Petrovich couldn't do it. Then he decided to do something else. He took a photo of the screen where the date of the coming Sunday flashed. In the photo, there was an announcer with a slightly blurred face, as if the image was moving. The caption read, "In memory of TV repairman Ivan Petrovich K., who passed away in his sleep." He lay awake all night, trying to remember how the announcer knew his name. Perhaps old employee lists had been preserved somewhere in the archives from when he repaired the television lighting. His surname could have remained in the documents. It all made sense. But that didn't make it any easier. Towards morning, he heard a quiet rustling sound, as if someone were changing channels without a remote control. Old programs appeared on the screen. Newsreels, news broadcasts, announcements. Among them was a recording in which he himself appeared briefly, young, in work overalls. He was carrying a spotlight, walking behind the camera. Then the announcer said, "These people will remain in the shadows, but without them, there would be no light." Ivan Petrovich involuntarily sat closer. The words seemed to be addressed to him. In the afternoon, he went to a former colleague's workshop to find out if any old parts from that television studio had been left behind. His colleague was surprised and said that after the fire, all the equipment had been written off and taken to the dump. No one had kept anything. But in an old catalog that he showed him, Ivan Petrovich noticed a photo of the same TV, a rare experimental model. Underneath it was written, "For internal broadcasting and archival control." He realized that his TV was not consumer electronics, but an internal service receiver, possibly used for synchronous testing of broadcast recordings. But how then to explain the news that had not yet happened? When he got home, he found a thin layer of dust under the TV with clear handprints in it. It was as if someone had placed their hands on the screen from the inside. He wanted to call a repairman, but his phone froze. A notification popped up on the display about a missed call from an unknown number, coinciding with the date of tomorrow's release. By evening, the TV turned back on. On the screen was the announcer, the same calm, confident voice. "Today, we will tell you about a man who realized too late that the broadcast was still on." Ivan Petrovich pulled the plug out of the socket, but the screen did not go out. He stood there, staring at his own reflection next to the announcer. And for the first time, he noticed that their faces were almost identical. He remembered a photograph from the attic, himself and Vera renovating the studio. In the picture, there was a man standing behind them, a vague silhouette reflected in the window. The shape of his face and his glasses were exactly the same as the announcer's. Ivan Petrovich slowly approached the screen. The image flickered slightly, and it seemed as if the announcer was saying words that could not be heard. Only his lips were moving. Ivan Petrovich noted the date and time in his notebook. Then he looked again. The announcer looked up and nodded, as if in agreement. The TV went blank. The room was plunged into silence, and only the reflection of the screen remained, dark as an abyss, in which a movement resembling breathing could be discerned. When the screen went dark, Ivan Petrovich sat for a long time, staring at his own reflection. The darkness in the room seemed dense, as if you could touch it. He wanted to convince himself that everything was explainable, but the feeling of someone else's presence did not go away. The light bulb on the ceiling flashed on and off. Old wiring, nothing unusual. But something inside his familiar sense of control over things was gone. He had lived his whole life by the rules of cause and effect, and now an object from his own profession was playing with him like a gullible spectator. He went to the kitchen, put the kettle on, and noticed that the hands of the wall clock were exactly 1 hour behind. Yesterday, they were fine. Then he looked at his phone. It showed a different time, coinciding with the mark of the last broadcast. He wrote it down in his notebook. Time failure, clock, airwaves. The next day, he decided to take the TV out after all. He waited until morning, wrapped the device in an old blanket so as not to break it, and dragged it down the stairs. A man in a courier's uniform was standing at the entrance, holding an unmarked box. Seeing Ivan Petrovich, he said he had a package for Vera S., apartment 14. Ivan explained that no one had lived there for a long time, but the courier just shrugged and left the box on the windowsill. That same evening, residents wrote in the local chat that someone had taken out a TV and left it under the canopy. The neighbors decided it was junk and put garbage bags next to it. In the morning, everything was gone, both the TV and the box. 2 days later, the announcer appeared again, this time on a different screen. Ivan Petrovich turned on his laptop to distract himself, but when it booted up, the browser played a short video clip. No source, no title. Inside was a familiar studio and the same voice. He said, "The broadcast continues." From that moment on, a series of strange, minor, but increasing oddities began. The light bulb in the stairwell flashed again at the same time the TV had turned on before. Someone rang the intercom every night at exactly midnight, but the camera showed a blank screen. In the neighborhood chat, people discussed that somewhere in the building, an old sound could be heard, a humming noise similar to the background noise of a TV. Someone even took a video and posted it, but the clip quickly disappeared. Ivan Petrovich noticed that his reflection in the window lagged a fraction of a second behind when he moved. He began to leave the lamp on to check. And indeed, on some evenings, the movement of the reflection did not match. He began to look for a rational explanation. On the internet, he found an old article about a series of televisions similar to his. It said that some models were used in experiments on direct transmission of signals on closed frequencies, and that some could function as mirror receivers, capturing their own image and repeating it after a certain time. It sounded like a legend, but it matched too closely. That day, a new tenant appeared in the stairwell. A short man with a suitcase and a box of tools. He introduced himself as an electrician and said he had come at the request of the housing office. Ivan Petrovich was surprised. He hadn't called anyone. The man checked the fuse box, said that the wiring was old, and added, as if in passing, "The main thing is not to touch the outlet under the TV. There is a loop to the old circuit, from which the common signal came." Then he smiled, picked up his suitcase, and left. Only a few hours later did Ivan Petrovich remember that none of his neighbors had mentioned the request. He went down to the fuse box. The seals were untouched, and there was a piece of paper lying near his door. Channel restored. At night, he was awakened by a faint knocking sound. At first, he thought someone was knocking on the radiator. Then he realized that the sound was coming from inside the wall where the TV used to stand. He put his ear to the wall and heard a dull hum, interspersed with quiet pauses, as if someone were sending a signal in Morse code. He took out his notebook again. On the last page, he carefully wrote, "If my name appears tomorrow, turn off the lights and wait for dawn." But dawn did not come on time. When he woke up, the clock hand was in the same place as it had been at night. The phone showed the date one day ahead. There was a quiet click from the outlet. He turned on the lamp, and for a moment, the room was filled with the soft light of the screen, even though there was no longer a TV in it. An image appeared on the wall opposite the bed, like a projection. A studio, an announcer, a familiar voice. On the table lay a stack of papers, copies of receipts, repair requests, photographs. Among them was a picture of Ivan Petrovich himself, taken from behind as he carried the TV down the stairs. The announcer read, "A resident of apartment 14 who lived alone reported faulty wiring and was found in his apartment a day after the power was cut off. The cause of death has not been determined." Ivan Petrovich took a step back, but the image followed him like a reflection. He noticed that the announcer had aged. Wrinkles, gray hair, glasses, similar to his own. It seemed as if the screen was aging along with him. He tried to shout over the silence, but the sound stuck in his throat. A thought flashed through his mind. If the TV was experimental, maybe it wasn't recording programs, but the memories of those around it. Maybe there was a recording of the old studio inside the circuit, their faces, their voices, and now it was counting time in its own way. He went to the storage room where he kept his tools, found a screwdriver, and began to remove the cover of the outlet from which the clicking sound was coming. Under a layer of dust was an old coaxial cable, cut and bent. In small print, it read, "Control channel, do not disconnect." He sat there for a long time, staring at those words, until he noticed that notifications began flashing across his phone screen, all with the same text, "Keep watching." He dropped his phone, but it didn't break. Only the screen darkened and reflected the pale silhouette of the announcer. By evening, Ivan Petrovich had turned off the electricity throughout the apartment. The candle he lit was reflected in the window pane, where a faint flicker of light was visible, as if someone behind the wall was also holding a candle. Footsteps could be heard in the distance, perhaps neighbors, perhaps an echo. He lay down, but sleep did not come. Time was stuck between night and morning, the hands of the clock not moving. He remembered Vera. Maybe her disappearance was also connected to this TV. Back then, after the studio was renovated, she complained that during tests, she could hear a signal-free broadcast, voices repeating past lines in the future tense. He thought she was making it up to explain the noise in the wiring. Now he wasn't so sure. When the candle burned out, the window screen went dark, but two silhouettes were still visible in the reflection. One was his own. The second was motionless, sitting at the table in the familiar pose of an announcer. At that moment, a humming sound came from behind the wall, like the start of a broadcast, steady and low, as if someone had turned on an old generator. Ivan Petrovich got up, turned on his flashlight, but the light went out. And then, in complete darkness, he heard the distinct rustle of paper. Someone was leafing through a notebook on the table. When he came closer, the page was open to the last entry. "If they show my name tomorrow, don't turn it off." He felt a chill down his spine and suddenly realized that the text had changed slightly. There was a pen in his hand, but he didn't remember writing it. A siren wailed outside, then fell silent. Outside the window, a screen lit up in the neighboring building. Blue flashes flickered in the windows, as if someone else was watching the same program. Ivan Petrovich stepped to the window and saw dozens of similar windows reflected in it. And in each one, the same frame flashed for a moment. The studio, the announcer, the viewer's name. He no longer tried to turn anything off. He just sat down opposite the wall, where the reflection was barely visible, and quietly said to himself that maybe this was just a way for memory to work through objects. But deep down, he already understood. The program would continue as long as there was someone watching. The morning began without morning light. Outside the window was a thick gray fog, as if the city had been covered with a film. For the first time in a long time, Ivan Petrovich did not hear elevators, car horns, or the footsteps of his neighbors. He turned on the radio, only hissing, as if sewn into a loop. On the kitchen table lay a notebook, open to a new page. The last entry was in neat letters in someone else's handwriting. "Check Channel 3. The broadcast continues." He realized that someone had been in the apartment while he was asleep that night. The door was locked from the inside. The window was closed, but there were shoe prints on the floor, in the dust by the threshold. Exactly 2 pairs. One was his old slippers. The other had smooth soles, like office shoes. The prints disappeared by the wall where the TV used to stand. He tried to remember if any of the utility workers had come in. He remembered the electrician with a suitcase. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it, but now he realized that there were no tools in that suitcase, and there was a sticker on the box, exactly like the ones on the photos of the studio equipment. The mark of those who serviced the archive broadcasts. He opened the old photograph he had found in the attic again. On the back, in addition to the inscription, Ivan and Vera, someone had later added, Internal Broadcast Control Department, and then a phone number that had long since become invalid. That day, he decided to go to where the studio had once stood. The building had been partially demolished and replaced by a shopping center, but part of the exterior walls still remained. The remains of inscriptions were visible on the bricks under the fresh plaster. Inside, among the new display cases, he recognized the outline of the old corridor he had walked down 20 years ago. Behind one of the walls in the storeroom, where boxes were now stacked, he noticed a niche covered with plywood. With some difficulty, he pried off the panel and saw a metal cabinet with a faded sign, Surveillance server, internal broadcast. Inside were dust, old reels, and film. One of them had his name on it. The date of filming was the year of his last renovation in this studio. He turned on the portable player brought by the guard, an old man who at first cursed, but then, noticing his interest, stayed nearby. The picture was blurry but distinguishable. Young Vera in the studio, setting up a microphone, turning, looking straight into the lens, and saying something without sound. Then he appears, Ivan, still without gray hair, with a spotlight in his hands. The camera shakes, and suddenly, the image is interrupted. At the end of the film, there is a handwritten note. Duplicate signal, do not play. The guard said that this room had not been opened since the fire. One technician had died then. He couldn't remember his surname, but it was something like K. Ivan Petrovich felt a chill run down his spine. He didn't die then. He quit a week after the fire. But if a technician with a similar surname had died, the studio could have mixed up the documents. When he went outside, the guard called out to him. He said that there was another envelope in the closet with the address of house number 14. He took it, promising to return it. The envelope had the same TV company's stamp and the inscription, Home Receiver Archive, Surveillance Mode. At home, he opened the envelope. Inside was a sheet of paper with a table, apartment numbers, surnames, dates. Opposite his apartment was a check mark and the note, Active Channel. Another line was Vera's apartment with the status, Merger Complete. He sat there for a long time, unable to comprehend the meaning. Merger was a technical term, but in this context it sounded like a death sentence. If their devices transmitted signals not only into the air but also back, Vera could stay there, inside. This time the TV wouldn't turn on, but the reflection of the screen in the black glass of the laptop monitor pulsed slowly, as if alive. He took a step closer and caught a glimpse of Vera's face. Young, glowing, slightly distorted. She seemed to be whispering something silently. Ivan Petrovich reached out his hand, and at that moment, the lamp above his head flashed on. There was a crackling sound in the kitchen, followed by a click, and the screen came to life. The announcer was different, a stern-looking woman with short hair. She read calmly, "The Forgotten Channel is returning to the airwaves. The broadcast will begin with viewer confirmation." On the table next to the TV lay a card, thin, plastic, with an embossed number and the words, Operator Identification. He didn't remember seeing it before. He realized that all this was part of the old reverse monitoring system. They were connected to see how viewers reacted to the broadcast. The camera built into the TV could transmit the image to the center. And perhaps after the fire, the circuit remained active, but now it transmitted not the reaction, but the viewers themselves. He took the card and placed it in front of the screen. The image flickered, and a man appeared in the studio. Not an announcer, not a cameraman, but somehow familiar. It was the same electrician with the suitcase. He sat in front of the camera, looking straight at it. At the bottom of the screen was a caption, Host, Communications Archive Engineer. A voice said, "Every signal requires a viewer." Ivan Petrovich realized that this man was not just a random technician. Perhaps he was the one who had started the retransmissions, using the old network of houses where these receivers were located. Then the couriers with boxes, the strange coincidences of addresses. It all made sense. They were looking for those who were connected to the past broadcasts. He remembered how Vera once said that every broadcast lives on as long as someone remembers it. And now someone had decided to turn this into a system. The next day, Ivan Petrovich went to his neighbors to find out if they had noticed anything strange. A young woman with a child said that in the evenings, the TV turned on the news by itself, without sound. A man from the neighboring building complained that his mirror sometimes showed other rooms. All these little things added up to one pattern. The program was returning through the viewers. He realized that he had to stop this, even if he didn't know how. In the evening, he gathered his old tools, found an old diagram from his archives, and began checking the wiring. In one of the sockets behind the kitchen cabinet, he found a small metal module the size of a coin, soldered directly into the cable. On the case was the logo of the same television studio. He removed the module and placed it on the table. At that moment, the lights in the kitchen came on, and a humming sound, like breathing, came from the laptop speakers. A voice came on quietly, as if right behind him. Signal lost. Broadcast unstable. He realized that he had torn out a piece of the chain, and perhaps for the first time in all this time, he had taken the right step. But the room had already changed. The reflections no longer matched. The sound in the hallway was not an echo, but something else. Footsteps, slow and heavy, approaching. He looked up. An image appeared on the window pane. The studio again, now empty, without the announcer. Just a flicker. His operator card lay on the table in the frame. The camera slowly approached it, and the letters appeared on the screen. Identification complete. Ivan Petrovich. He stood up and suddenly realized that the lamp was not flashing. There was no shadow, but the reflection was still sitting there. Not him. What remained in the air? He stood in front of the window, feeling the cold coming from the glass. The reflection did not repeat his movements. It sat motionless, staring straight at him. A faint hum came from the depths of the apartment, as if an old generator had started up. Ivan Petrovich slowly turned around. The light in the hallway flashed on, and the TV, which he thought had been taken away long ago, turned on by itself. But now it was back in its place, without dust or scratches, new as on the first day. On the screen was a studio, an empty table, a microphone, a soft, gray background. Then Vera entered the frame, young, just as he remembered her from his last year of work. She sat down, fixed her hair, and looked straight into the camera. Her voice sounded clear, as if coming from inside the room. Broadcasting is possible as long as we are remembered. But memory is not a signal. It is a duty. If the channel is not closed, it continues to seek viewers. He realized that this was not an archive recording. She was addressing him. For a moment, the room seemed to split in two. one where he stood by the window, and another reflected where she was speaking. You stayed, her voice continued, because you wanted to understand. But you are not a spectator. You are the source. Ivan Petrovich did not immediately grasp the meaning. Something clicked inside him. All these weeks, the transmissions, the coincidences, he had been trying to find the one who was in control, but all he had found was himself. Since he had taken the TV outside, the signal had not disappeared, which meant that the circuit was closed on him. He took a step toward the screen. Vera said, "If you want this to end, you have to take yourself off the air." He sat down at the table and slowly leafed through the notebook. On each page were dates, names, and events that had already happened. And among them was his own last entry. The broadcast continues. He tore out the page, crumpled it up, and threw it in the trash can. The screen flickered. Vera looked down, as if she had seen what he had done. "Now someone has to confirm the end of the broadcast," she said. At that moment, footsteps could be heard behind the wall. Quiet, steady footsteps. Someone stopped at the door and knocked twice. Ivan Petrovich did not move. Then a familiar voice rang out. The same electrician, calm, slightly tired. "You did what you could. I'll take care of the rest." He opened the door. The same man was standing on the threshold, but now without a suitcase, holding a small, portable remote control in his hands. His face seemed different, older but softer, with a kind of human weariness. He walked into the room and looked at the screen. "You weren't supposed to be part of the network," he said, looking at the TV. "You were entered by mistake when the studio was closing. At the time, the system was looking for operators, and your last name matched that of an archive technician. The channel didn't know who to consider the starting point." Ivan Petrovich listened, not believing it. "So, all this time, the broadcast was going through me?" The man nodded. "Yes, you are the connection node. But now, if you want, I can close the channel. It's safe for everyone else." He looked at the screen. Vera was silent, but her eyes softened, as if she were waiting for a decision. Ivan Petrovich thought about his old tools, about the years spent repairing other people's wires, bringing light to places where there was darkness. All his life he had been connecting circuits, and now he had to break the last one. He said quietly, "Close it." The man took a thin cable out of his pocket and plugged it into the socket under the TV. A loading bar appeared on the screen, followed by a short message. End of broadcast. The light in the room began to dim, as if the lamps were going out one by one. Vera's image faded away, and the announcer's face disappeared. Just before the end, Vera smiled and said, "Now they will remember us correctly." The screen went blank. The room fell silent. Only the clock on the wall, for the first time in many days, ticked steadily, without stopping. Ivan Petrovich looked at it and realized that time was moving again. The man with the remote control took the operator's card from the table and put it in his pocket. The transfer is complete, but sometimes the echo remains. If you hear noise, just don't turn it on. He nodded and left. Ivan Petrovich was left alone. The apartment smelled of dust and fresh air, like after a thunderstorm. He opened the window. It was raining lightly outside, a sparse, almost transparent rain. Voices could be heard in the distance, real, live voices. He put the notebook in a drawer, closed it, and felt at peace for the first time in a long time. But when he turned off the light and walked past the black screen of his laptop, a faint light flashed in the reflection for a split second, as if an old TV was trying to catch a signal. He didn't turn around. He just said quietly, "That's it now." The screen remained black. The outcome was simple. No one in the building saw any more strange transmissions. A week later, the wiring in the stairwell was replaced, and the smell of burning disappeared. The couriers stopped coming. In the neighborhood chat, they discussed only once that the old man from the 4th floor had helped the electricians with the repairs, after which everyone's lights came back on. Only one boy from the neighboring building said that at night a faint flicker would sometimes appear on the wall in the hallway, as if someone had turned on an old television. But the adults didn't believe him. And in House 14, everything went on as usual. Time moved on as it should. And only in the archives of the old television studio, on one of the tapes among the labeled folders, remained an unsigned recording. A studio, an empty table, a camera, and a quiet voice off-screen saying, "The broadcast is over." And after a short pause, the rustle